Okay. So we are still missing Heiyeon. Let's see if he comes before his presentation, because he's actually the last. We may still have time for him to come.
Yeah, worst case scenario, we've got the video. Stefan?
Yes.
Are you presenting the last paper, or how come you're online with us?
I just joined the session. I accidentally have the rights to enter the session before. So
okay, cool.
I just
That's
hang
all
around,
good.
do nothing. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Should I maybe start sharing my screen right now, or?
Yeah, we will start in 1 minute, but feel free to share your screen already if you want.
Okay.
Sandra, as chair, will you introduce him?
Yeah, I will introduce the paper and you, of course.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so we are in time already. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon if you are in New Zealand's time zone. We are going to start our multimodal VR session. I am Sandra, I will be the chair of this session. Remember to post all the questions you have through Discord. We have a dedicated channel for this session, and today we will have 6 presentations of 7 minutes each, and at the end we will have like 15 minutes for questions. So first we will have Nicolas Barbotin, and he will be presenting the paper titled Evaluating Visual Cues for Future Airborne Surveillance Using Simulated Augmented Reality Displays. So go ahead.
Thanks, Sandra. So I'll just play the video and answer the questions later.
Hello everyone, I'm Nicolas Barbotin. I'm a research assistant at UniSA, and today I'll be talking about the research I did together with James, Andrew, Thierry, Olivier, and Bruce. As you can see here, the title seems a bit complicated, but really it's just about 2 things: using AR in surveillance airplanes and simulating AR in VR. So let's get straight into it with the problem. There are people whose job is to monitor the sea for potential issues. One way to do that is from far up in the sky using so-called airborne surveillance aircraft, which are essentially airplanes with big observation windows. This is convenient as it allows you to monitor huge areas, but it also requires all of your attention because from that distance these objects are small and hard to notice. It's also easy to lose track of whatever you were looking at, as you also have to take care of some other tasks aboard the airplane. So, what if we replace the observation window with an AR display? How exactly would it help the operator? Let's say we had a way to identify and track objects of interest. We could display visual cues to the operator to keep track of the targets. We could also move the secondary tasks onto that display. This way, the operator doesn't have to look anywhere else and is constantly aware of what the object is becoming. But would it actually improve the operator's performances? And how important, and I'll get back to that later because that's what's super interesting to me, how important is the choice of focal plane for the display? Well, we ran a user study with 24 participants to find out. But before I get to the results, let me talk about our system. So, because it would have been quite difficult to experiment with a real surveillance airplane, we ran the study in virtual reality. Our system features an observation window through which you have to observe the sea looking for a sailing boat. The window is an AR display, so it can render visual cues to help you locate the boat. The system also features a control panel, which represents the secondary tasks operators are responsible for. There are 4 types of cues, including a condition with no cue at all, and there are 2 types of control panels. A physical control panel on the right, and an AR control panel on the window. Each trial would go like this. First, the participant acknowledges the current position of the boat by looking at it. We use eye tracking to validate that. Then, the participant solves a series of small tasks using one of the control panels. And finally, the participant needs to relocate the target as fast as possible. Every time we would shuffle the type of cue and control panel. But there is another condition we kept hidden from participants. As I said earlier, we decided to go for VR. We didn't go in the details of whether evaluating AR systems in VR is a valid approach or not. However, we did do our best to make sure our system looked as realistic as we could, but also by simulating the focal plane of the display and the eye accommodation effect of the user. In case some of you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to the fact that our human eyes can only have a portion of our field of view in focus. In these pictures, for example, either the tree is in focus or the mountain is, not both. It's relevant to us because, depending on what focal plane our display is projecting on, the participant might have either the sea or the AR cues in focus, and not both. So, we imported a depth of field shader into our project, but then the problem was, how do we know what should be in focus? The simple answer is eye trackers. On top of a gaze ray, they can measure the convergence distance of our eyes as pictured here. For reasons that I won't go into here, this value is quite inaccurate and it's hardly usable. But for our airborne surveillance simulation, all we need is to be able to distinguish between the window which is close and the sea which is far. So if we smooth and threshold that value, accommodation in VR is actually feasible. Now that we've got eye accommodation working, we can experiment with 2 types of AR display with different focal length. And that's actually our hidden condition. Let me demonstrate that. So here is our AR display with the AR control panel displayed. In one case, we set the focal length to a near value like here, and you can see that either the display is in focus or the sea, but not both. Or we set the focal length to a far value like here, causing the AR display to be in focus together with the sea. So to recap, in each trial, we're alternating between different types of visual cues, different medium of secondary tasks, and different AR displays projecting at different distances. And we're trying to see how all of this affect the time the participant take to recover the location of the boat, and the amount of time they spend on control panel tasks. To conclude all of this, we found that surveillance operators could definitely benefit from AR. We found significance between trials with AR cues and without. Then, moving secondary tasks on the AR display improves search task performances, but at the cost of decreased secondary task performances. We think that this has to do with the transparency of the AR panel. On one hand, it allows the participant to see the target even while working on secondary tasks, but on the other hand, it makes the panel harder to read. It also seems that the far plane is the best choice of focal plane for the AR display. We only found significance of that when no cues are used, but we believe that it still holds even with cues. We just can't see it because the benefits of having cues overcomes the benefits of projecting on the far plane. Finally, and that's something that I personally find super interesting, we added an extra trial with the accommodation effect disabled and asked participants if they noticed any change. Only one participant out of 24 noticed the accommodation effect, the others just had no clue. There are also plenty of other findings I don't have the time to present here, so please check out our paper. I'd like to end this presentation by stating that we've open sourced our system with the accommodation feature, so please feel free to check it out and who knows, maybe use it for your own research.
All right, so that's it. Thank you for your attention. As I said, we've open sourced the system, so if you happen to have any use for it, it's on GitHub. Don't hesitate to click on the little star on the project. Gives us a bit of visibility. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you for your presentation. So we will be moving on to the next paper, which will be presented by WanYi from the College of Computer Science University. And the title is Empirical Evaluation of Calibration and Long-Term Carryover Effects of Reverberation on Egocentric Auditory Depth Perception in Virtual Reality. You can start. Oh, you are muted. Can you please unmute yourself? You can go on.
Okay. Okay, so before we jump in, I'd like to take a second and acknowledge the diversity in our team by giving a quick shout out to all our collaborators from across the globe that made this multi-institutional collaboration possible. Okay. Distance perception in IV is very crucial when users need to react accurately to some special information like driving to an assigned location or distinguishing targets in visualizations. However, there's a well-known distance perception problem in VR, the distance compression. Users tend to underestimate the distance between themselves and the object, although HMDs have improved over the years, allowing for more accurate estimation. The distance compression issue continues to persist and yet to be fully resolved. As we know, distance perception involves multi-sensory experiences. When perceiving distance in the real world, people may integrate information from multiple perception channels towards estimating overall distances. Auditory depth perception in VR is seldom discussed in VR. Users mainly rely on visual information. With modern IVs increasingly featuring multi-sensory experiences, auditory information provides another way to enhance distance perception. In our study, we are using reverberation as information for participants to perceive distances. So what is reverberation? It's an accumulation of sound waves and is created by sound reflecting off the surfaces in the environment. It's resulted in better distance estimation in VR in previous research, and it is shown in addition to visual information compensated for distance compression in VR. Another important idea in our study, attunement and calibration. Attunement is an important type of differentiation where the human learns to detect different sources of perception information. Along with the attunement, the user also becomes calibrated during perception learning. Many works investigate the calibration and the carryover effects, but they are largely been limited to visual information. In our work, we aim to discover if users can calibrate their distance of perception with the reverberation stimuli in VR and whether this can be used to make users potentially perceive distances more accurately. There are many related works use auditory information to enhance distance perception, like visual distance perception is influenced by the auditory environmental context through reverberation-related cues, or users tend to associate longer RTs with further distances, indicate the potential to alter RT towards compensated distance under estimation in VR. As we know, perception learning via calibration and its carryover effect. Like we use calibrated distance compression when different perturbations of perceptual haptic feedback were presented. So our research questions are to answer whether the participant can calibrate to auditory reverberation towards enhancing egocentric distance estimation and whether the calibration effect carry over a period of 1 month and 6 months. So our experiment consists of a pre-test phase, a calibration phase, and a post-phase. In both the pre-test and the post-test phases, participants provided their distance judgment of sound source location without any feedback. And in calibration phase, participants received feedback and were allowed to readjust their distance judgment to the actual distance. So in our experiment, we use within subject in our study, and the factor is actual distance AD, measure is perceived distance PD. We use the same audio clip and generate it with 10 different reverberation time and remain the other properties like intensity the same. To avoid the participants simply memorize the stimulus for each AD, we separate the stimuli into two groups, and its corresponding RT were different in the calibration and other phases. The exact ideal RT in our virtual scene should be 0.7 seconds. We use rather exaggerated RT in effort to study if participants can distinguish sounds more easily and to amplify the power of the experiment. So to evaluate the significant interaction effect between AD and different phases, the continuous independent variance of AD was mean-centered to eliminate any multi-collinearity effect, and the interaction term AD multiply phase was added to the model in a hierarchical multiple regression, and all three predictors, AD, phase, and actual distance by phase interaction term were all significant predictors of PD. Let's take a closer look at this plot. The linear regression equation will be shown at the same time. The ideal prediction is represented by the dotted line here. The slope equals to 1. In other words, the dotted line represents the prediction where participants' perceived distance is equal to the AD of the presented stimuli. Thus, a regression line that is closer to the dotted line implies the perceived egocentric distance are more accurate. Let's see the regression lines by phase order. Firstly, it's evident the slope of pretest phase in which participants estimate the distance without any feedback is much lower than the other phases than the calibration phase that our participants receive feedback. And the post phase, its accuracy is very close to a perfect prediction. And after 1 month, the accuracy drops a little. Then after 6 months, the accuracy even remains better than without any feedback. The distance estimation accuracy in different phases was computed by percent accuracy formula, and it's created a sign error of percent accuracy where negative will represent underestimation of the actual target distance, and the positive value represent overestimation. The mean percent accuracy score were subject to a 5-phase multiply 5-child set repeat measure ANOVA analysis, and it also revealed a significant effect of phase. From this chart, we can really infer that participants largely underestimated distances in the pretest phase, while their post-test estimate significantly higher accuracy score even at 1 month and 6 months. So we can say employing a calibration phase appears to improve participants' egocentric distance estimates in IBEs. We use RT as info for distance perception might align with previous work on distance perception learning. Users can successfully calibrate their perception based on visual feedback during a calibration phase. So what does all mean? We can minimize the need for users to be recalibrated frequently in VR in some applications like training simulation and so on. We conclude that the users can really differentiate various lengths of RTs in VR and enhancing their distance estimation by using perception learning to auditory reverberation. And we find this learning effect seems to persist for at least 6 months. For our future work, we aim to combine with other sensory information and use for more realistic reverberation stimuli in our study. Thank you for your concentration. Please feel free to let us know if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your presentation. Let's move on to the next paper. Remember, for all the participants we have, you can post your questions through the Discord server. So next we have Sanjin So from the University of Tokyo, and she will be presenting the paper titled Simulating Olfactory Cocktail Party Effect in VR, a multi-odor display approach based on attention. You can start.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start. So hi everyone, my name is Sanjin So, and I'm from the University of Tokyo, and now I'm going to introduce our paper titled Simulating Olfactory Cocktail Party Effect in VR, a multi-odor display approach based on attention. And so in the current literature of multi-odor display in VR, users usually receive a mixture of different smells, like in this previous study. And however, there is a common approach of odor interaction is designed basically based on the user's spatiality information. However, there is a problem that humans' olfactory sensation cannot distinguish odorant mixtures very well. And as long as this problem is not solved, users' olfactory experience in VR may still lack realness and intuitiveness. So we started to look at the phenomenon of audio sensation, which is called the cocktail party effect. It means that humans are able to distinguish particular stimuli of their attention among others and filter out other non-concerned stimuli such as noise. And this phenomenon does not exist in olfaction sensation, but what if we can create an olfactory version of the cocktail party effect so that the odor mixtures will be easier to recognize, and then we can provide an augmented olfactory experience to improve the sense of presence and realness in VR. So in this paper, we propose a novel odor presentation approach to simulate the olfactory cocktail party effect in VR. Specifically, we dynamically adjust the intensity composition of multi-odor mixture presentation according to the user's attention. So to implement the system, we first created a scene in VR and positioned three scented objects in front of the user, like in this picture. And in this case, we chose the scent of coffee, oranges, and a strawberry cake. And then we get the data of eye tracking sensors as the user's attention information to determine which objects they are focusing on. And for odor composition, we first decided 3 intensity levels of perception, weak, strong, medium, strong. And then to regulate perceptual levels of different kind of odors, we decided the device concentration values from the average results of the labeled magnitude scale tests for each scent, so that they are consistent in the perceptual level, intensity levels. So here is the actual VR odor presentation system. We used an HTC headset with eye tracking sensors embedded, and then we used a commercially available odor display device called Aroma Shooter. And this device produces airflow injections of multiple odors at the same time, and we can instantly control the change of the separate intensities. And like in this video, the concentration combination is dynamically changed according to the user's attention. So for user study, we conducted experiments on 3 different odor display conditions. The first 2 is our proposed method, and we adjust the variations by whether to display a weak level of the background odors, and we call them strong weak and strong none, in short of intensity combinations, and then a control condition of no interaction with odor or tension. And for each experimental condition, we designed the experiment as 2 parts. The first is to measure the perceptual intensity, and here we gave instructions to participants to tell them which objects to focus on, and they were asked to scale the intensity levels they perceived of each odor through a visual analog scale. And the second part is to evaluate their user experience. And in this session, participants were asked to interact with the system by shifting their attention freely to objects or the environment. And after the session, they answered the question about their experience levels of first pleasantness of the odors, and the enjoyment, intuitiveness of VR experiences, and finally self-rated olfactory sensitivity. And they also answered a set of questions on their sense of presence from the IPQ questionnaire. This session was repeated for 3 times to prevent randomness of users' interaction actions. So finally, the complete experiment trials was conducted for 3 conditions, 2 proposed and 1 baseline. We conducted the experiments on totally 12 participants, and here are the results. So first is the perceptual odor intensities under each odor presentation conditions, and comparing the results of the proposed method and the baseline conditions, we can confirm that the participants could detect the strengthened odor presentations clearly when they were focusing on the corresponding objects. But what we didn't expect is that the participants could still sense the background odors even when they were not presented in the strong noun condition. We inferred that it was possibly because of the cross-modal effect of visual stimuli and the odors in VR, because the participants could still see all of the objects at the same time. And next is the objective user experience evaluation. We can see that the proposed attention odor system was able to improve users' experience, including olfactory balance, enjoyment, and intuitiveness. The effect of strong noun presentation was slightly larger than the strong weak, but there were no significant differences. However, when it comes to self-rated olfactory sensitivity, only the strong weak condition showed significant improvement here. It means that by keeping a weak level of background odors, the user could also get an augmented sense that they could recognize the odor mixture more precisely. And finally, is the results of IPQ presence, and it shows that the attention odor method also improved the sense of spatial presence and and realness. So to summarize our work, first to optimize and augment users' multi-odor experience in VR, we proposed an odor presentation system that modulates odor intensity compositions according to users' attention. And the user study showed that compared to mere spatiality-based multi-odor presentation, the proposed method performed better in providing pleasant and intuitive experience, and also the sense of presence. And for future work, we want to merge the attention and spatiality-based odor display to provide like a more comprehensive and better VR experience of odor display. And that's all of my presentation, and thank you for listening, and feel free to ask any questions later.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation. So next we will have Brandon Matthews from the University of South Australia with the paper titled Shape-Aware Haptic Retargeting for Accurate Hand Interactions. You can start whenever you like.
Thanks, Sandra. As Sandra mentioned, I'm Brandon Matthews from the Australian Research Centre for Interactive and Virtual Environments at the University of South Australia. So I'm presenting my paper, Shape-Aware Haptic Retargeting for Accurate Hand Interactions. So haptic retargeting enables the reuse of passive haptics to enable us to interact with virtual objects that are in different positions to our physical objects. So previously, this has been applied to various things, such as remapping cubes to a physical cube to multiple virtual cubes, or remapping physical and virtual interfaces. So an early example, users saw 3 virtual cubes, and then they would reach out and they'd be redirected, and they'd be able to grasp a single physical cube using this haptic retargeting. So several variations of this illusion. However, in this particular paper, we primarily focus on the fly haptic retargeting. So in most haptic retargeting implementations, the origin, the target, and the hand is represented by a single position in space, such as the fingertip of the hand or the center of the target. And you can see in this particular example in the top right, that when the fingertip is touching the corner of the physical cube in the center, sorry, just get that, the virtual hand is not quite on the corner of the physical cubes. And typically, we've also, typically this has caused interactions in haptic retargeting to be limited to one finger. So you can only touch the target with one finger, or maybe use the palm and you can grasp the target. So the motivation of our research was to explore and develop an extension to on-the-fly haptic retargeting and other haptic retargeting methods that can provide accurate whole hand interactions with retargeted proxies of any size and any complexity. So some previous research has implemented an understanding of target shape, including the sparse haptic proxy system and Zhao and Fulmer's functionally optimized method for continuous retargeting. And these methods consider the shape of the target or the origin. However, to our knowledge, no previous method has considered the shape of the entire hand. So we present shape-aware haptic retargeting. This is an extension to existing haptic retargeting methods that can ensure a user's retargeted virtual hand always contacts the virtual target in the same relative position as their real hand will contact the real target. And likewise, their hand will also be realigned regardless of which part of their hand contacts the retargeting origin. So we generalize the distance calculation of state-of-the-art haptic retargeting to consider the shortest distance from any hand representation to any target representation and to any origin representation. So we formulated 3 shape approximations that can represent physical hand, target, and origin with varying degrees of accuracy. And these are multi-position, primitive, mesh geometry. And these representations could take other forms, but the most important thing is that we need to be able to compute the distance between them. So in multi-position, we leverage multiple key positions on the hand, target, and origin, and the distance becomes the closest pair of positions between the hand or the target or the hand and the origin. Primitive is similar, but we use multiple primitive representations like spheres and cubes, and then the shortest distance is the shortest distance between those primitives. And the mesh distance method is different in that we represent the hand and target with a triangulated mesh. And then we find the shortest distance between the triangulated meshes. And we do this using a compute shader for efficiency. So we compute effectively a brute force distance between the hand and the target. We chose this approach for 2 primary reasons. Firstly, the hand's a concave mesh and it forms in real time. And this limits the applicability of some mesh distance optimizations. And secondly, we can implement it relatively simply in parallel and do that on the GPU. So we ran a set of simulated evaluations rather than a user evaluation to quantify how our techniques performed. The simulations were selected to represent a variety of interactions and configurations. And to measure the performance, we measured the distance between the actual virtual hand position and the expected virtual hand position. So the 3 target types are three target shapes are position, primitive, and mesh. So these are our target types. And then we have 5 hand types, palm, index finger, and so on. In the cube grasping simulation, we the hand grasps a 5 centimeter cube. In the button pressing simulation, the hand presses a button with each finger. And we sample the error on each press. On the complex object simulation, we use a more complicated mesh, specifically the Utah teapot. This is a concave mesh that can only closely be approximated by multiple primitives rather than just one. And the error is sampled when the hand grasps the teapot handle. So across the board in these simulations, we found that the primitive and mesh hands perform the best, both providing an error of 0 millimeters for the primitive and mesh targets in all of the simulations. Particularly, we note that in the button pressing simulation, the multi-point also produces an error of 0 millimeters. Sorry. So this means that we can enable interaction with all 5 fingers, but not necessarily any other part of the hand when pressing a button. We also ran a simulation, which we call a continuous simulation, in which the hand traces the top edge of a box using the tip of its index finger. And so this emulates like an exploration type interaction. And the error was sampled every 50 milliseconds as the hand moved throughout the interaction. So in this simulation, we found that the mesh targets produce an error of 0 throughout the interaction for all hands beside the palm, as with the primitive target. The palm hand and the position target produce visible variations in the path. And so you can see at one point the error exceeds 30 millimeters. But a similar interaction with any of the other fingers would show similar variance with the index finger. So in conclusion, we developed shape-aware haptic retargeting. And this is an extension to existing haptic retargeting methods that enables interaction between all parts of the user's hand and the target. So we used simulated evaluations that showed mesh and primitive representations both provide accurate interaction with the entire hand and the entire target. And primitive was more performant, however, it's less accurate to the true shape of the target and hand. And multi-position could also have uses for remapped physical virtual interfaces and is much more performant than the other techniques. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions later.
Okay, great. Thank you for your presentation. So now we have Brandon Matthews again with a different paper, which is titled Adaptive Reset Techniques for Haptic Retargeted Interaction. So you can start, or you can drink a bit of water first if you want.
Thanks. I'll just share the screen again. Okay, so for anyone who missed the first one, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Brandon Matthews from the Australian Research Centre for Interactive and Virtual Environments at UniSA. I'm presenting another paper. This is an invited journal, Adaptive Reset Techniques for Haptic Retargeted Interaction. So as I mentioned previously, haptic retargeting enables the reuse of simple objects. And we've previously been exploring this for remapped physical and physical virtual interfaces. So with haptic retargeting for this system, we can map a single physical input component, such as a button, on a real interface to multiple virtual buttons on a virtual interface by introducing an offset as the person reaches for the button. So this provides a realistic haptic feedback when pressing the button. And there are limits to how far we can take this illusion. So we know that within a previously determined range of angular and translational gains, the retargeting can remain undetectable to the user. To realign the virtual hand with the user's real hand between interactions, we require a reset action where the hand returns to the origin. But if we change the target without this, we can see the hand jumps to the new target, which can break the redirection illusion. So the motivation of this research is to reduce the impact of reset actions on haptic retargeting, and where possible to remove the reset actions and provide continuous haptic retargeting. We also explore the implications of these methods for a remapped physical virtual system in a user study. So previous work has involved multiple different types of reset actions, including pressing a physical button that's near the user, moving the hand behind an infinite plane between the user and the targets, or beyond a given distance from the targets. However, techniques like Zhao and Follmer's continuous redirection doesn't use a reset, and this is achieved by pre-computing a continuous warp field. However, this doesn't necessarily support the ability to move from one target directly to another target if they share the same physical target. On the fly haptic retargeting, as I mentioned previously, is a technique developed by Cheng et al. And this enables the user's target to change during the initial movement. So before their hand gets too close to the target, they can change target. You can see that in this video here. So we developed a set of adaptive reset techniques that adapt to the user's interactions to minimize the amount of movement required to complete the reset. And we're moving from one virtual target to another virtual target that each share the same physical target, a reset's always required. The reset position, however, can be adjusted to minimize the amount of movement required while keeping the gain below those detectable thresholds or tolerable thresholds. So where the physical object is different for two virtual targets, we found the reset can be skipped if the angular and translational gain are below the tolerable or detectable thresholds. So this is a property of on-the-fly haptic retargeting that allows us to shift the origin, so we can move the origin to the current physical target and enable continuous movement to the next target. So inspired by previous reset actions, we devised 3 general reset techniques, and these are point, threshold, and touch. So for each technique, we implemented both a static and an adaptive variant. In the static point technique, the reset is a point in space, placed a fixed distance from the midpoint between the current and next targets. And in the adaptive variant, the distance changes, and it's always the lowest distance at which the angular and translational gain are below this limit. And we can skip the reset entirely if both those are already below the tolerable and detectable limit. So the threshold technique is similar to the point technique, but the reset is an infinite plane between the user and the targets. And for the adaptive variant, the distance uses the same calculation method as the point technique. The touch technique is different entirely from the other two in that instead of moving away from the targets, the user completes the reset by interacting with a co-located pair of physical and virtual targets. So this effectively aligns the hands through completion of another button press or a similar interaction to the other interactions. So in the static variant, this is always one co-located pair that we always press. In the adaptive variant, we consider every co-located pair, and the selected pair is the one that provides the least angular and translational gain. As with the other adaptive variants, the reset is skipped if the gain is below the given limit. So to understand the effectiveness of these adaptive reset techniques on task performance and usability, we conducted a user evaluation of the 3 techniques and their static and adaptive variants. So we recruited 30 participants and measured a range of quantitative performance metrics, as well as system usability through the system usability scale. And we had 2 additional questions on a 5-point Likert scale. Specifically about the movement, how the person perceived the difference in their hand accuracy and movement and position. So the setup for this, we had a physical interface with 5 tactile buttons, and we used capacitive sensor pads to detect cases where the participant missed the physical button. The virtual interface consisted of 32 buttons in 2 rings, with 4 of the physical buttons aligned with 4 of the virtual buttons. Participants wore an HTC Vive Pro and used a Leap motion device for hand tracking. And each participant completed 3 sequences of 32 interactions in a random order until all buttons were pressed. And the reset interaction was performed between button presses where required. The results for the quantitative measures in this study showed that the lowest task completion time was with the threshold technique, with the adaptive threshold and point techniques each significantly faster than their counterparts. The rate of misses was significantly higher, which is for the touch, which is likely due to the angular and translational gain sometimes being beyond the tolerable or the detectable threshold, and the user overshooting the target due to the proximity of their hand to the targets during the redirection. And the excess travel was significantly lower for point than any other method. And this, coupled with a low rate of misses, indicated to us that the participants were the most precise with the point technique. And the movement speed was significantly lower for touch than other methods, and highest in the static threshold condition. And we noted that participants tended to retract their hand very quickly and overshoot the reset distance. And this is supported by the excess travel analysis, which showed us that adaptive threshold resulted in the highest excess travel. So even though we moved the reset closer, people would overshoot the reset. So the qualitative metrics were examined using Friedman's ANOVA, and no significant differences were found in the questions about hand position and movement accuracy. However, we did find that the threshold technique was considered significantly more usable than the touch technique. So in conclusion, we developed a set of adaptive reset techniques for haptic retargeting. The adaptive point and threshold techniques in particular were found to reduce time and movement required to complete the reset. And in some cases, the reset could be skipped or integrated into the interaction sequence using our touch technique. Thank you again for your attention, and I look forward to your questions later.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation again. So finally, we have Hye-Yeon Kim but I think he didn't make it to the presentation. So Mandy, do you have the backup video on hand? Okay, so we will see the video for the paper titled Studying the Effects of Congruence of Auditory and Visual Stimuli on Virtual Reality Experiences. I think we are not getting the audio through. Yeah, we don't have audio.
To converge and integrate. The first is temporal congruence.
Okay, now,
As seen
thank you.
in the leftmost picture, the audiovisual stimuli must occur simultaneously. Next, the second is spatial congruence, where both stimuli must occur at the same location. The third is semantic congruence, where both stimuli must be semantically identical to object and context. The fourth is synesthetic congruence. This study is based on the cross-modal correspondence phenomenon, which means synesthesia congruence on a general people basis. For example, if you look at the picture, the bright bird sings a high-pitched song and the dark bird sings a relatively low-pitched song. In this way, when certain characteristics of the two stimuli coincide, it is called synesthetic coincidence. This is the overall outline of the experiment to test the virtual space to which the previous 4 condition definitions have been applied. In phase 1, individual biases are investigated through preliminary experiments, and in phase 2, the main experiment is conducted. The preliminary experiment is conducted to check the critical point at which the strangeness is first felt. Moreover, participants will experience the main gain with individual thresholds applied. An example of the experiment looks like this. The left is preliminary experiment that measures the user's cognitive bias using a sensory distorted bomb. And the main experiment on the right is a simple game experience, and we measured how the user's experience changes by giving sensory distortion to the virtual space. There are 12 main experiences in total. Baseline refers to a space in which stimuli are temporally, spatially, and semantically congruent, but synesthetically incongruent. There are 3 types of temporal incongruence experiences. First, E1 incongruence is less than the identified individual's critical point. E2 incongruence is equal to the critical point, and E3 incongruence is greater than the critical point. Next, the spatial incongruence is the same. There is only a difference caused by giving an angle difference, not a time difference. There are 2 types of semantic incongruence. A change in only the verb meaning is called a weak semantic incongruence, whereas a change in both the subject and the verb meaning is called a strong semantic incongruence. Next, in the synesthetic congruence experience, the relationship between color and pitch and the volume relationship between color and sound, which general people also perceive, are applied. In the preliminary experiment, each participant sees the unique color of a particular event and has them adjust the pitch and volume of the sound. So the experiments in which the color and sound pitch are congruent is E9, and the experience in which the color and sound volume are congruent is E10. And the so-called multiple synesthetic congruence experience to which both of these synesthesia congruences were applied is E11. Next are the experimental results. The resulting graph looks like this. We applied mixed method data analysis to analyze the results. Interview results can be found in our paper. From the left, simulator sickness, presence, and immersion are compared by virtual space, and below is a separate analysis of immersion elements. A discussion of the relevant results will be summarized on the next page along with full graphs. First of all, the temporal incongruence is graphed in red. There are individual differences in temporal incongruence, and as expected, the user experience is not affected as long as the critical point is not crossed, as expected. Perhaps this is due to the temporal window integration ability, the human and cognitive ability to achieve integration even with a slight time difference. However, temporal incongruence greater than the critical point negatively affects presence. This is due to disturbances in multisensory integration, and there were many negative comments, especially in interactive events involving avatars. This may have interfered with the user's interaction with the environment. The large temporal incongruence also negatively affected motion sickness. Next, the spatial incongruence is the yellow graph. Individual differences exist, and if the critical point is not exceeded, there is no adverse effect. This has to do with spatial ventricalism. This ability prevents us from recognizing weak spatial incongruence. Next, if the critical point is exceeded, the presence is reduced. Due to the frequent failure of multisensory integration, we found that it negatively impacted avatar interaction. But surprisingly, the spatial incongruence increased immersion. The results show that the challenge and cognitive factors are elevated in IEQ. This is related to the visual dominance trait. However, we confirmed that the spatial inconsistency caused intense motion sickness. Third, semantic incongruence is graphed in green color. Surprisingly, semantic incongruence does not negatively affect presence. If we analyze the preference of the event, results can see that the users were quite generous with the events other than the avatar. This result is similar to the plausibility illusion. Equally, if there is a sufficient logical consistency within the virtual world, this suggests that this semantic inconsistency is most likely not a problem at all. Second, semantic incongruence resulted in users becoming even more immersed. It was possible to recognize an increase in the muse from user interviews, and from this we can infer the reason. We can also confirm that it did not affect motion sickness. Finally, the synesthetic congruence can be seen by looking at the blue graph. It can be seen that the synesthetic congruence design increased both immersion and presence. This synesthetic congruence intensifies the stimulus and raises the level of emotional arousal. This leads directly to fun and excitement. It should be noted, however, that multiple synesthesia mapping did not yield better results than mapping only one synesthesia. This suggests that appropriate multi-synesthesia modeling should be explored. Thank you for your attention. If you have any other questions, please send them to the email below.
Okay, thank you, Mandy, for taking care of the video presentation. So let's move on to the questions now from the audience. Let's go. Let's follow the paper presentation of order, if that's okay. So first we have a question for WanYi, and I'm quoting here. I am not confident that most people will be able to recognize the distance of a horn sound in a room in real life. So I wonder if you have or are considering doing the same experiment, but with the use of wearing the HMD in a physical room of the same dimensions and playing a real horn sound played at different distances from the user, and then have them do the same input while wearing the HMD.
Yeah, also comparing how users may perceive distance to auditory reverberation signals in VR and the real world would be interesting, but that was not the goal of our study. We know from the literature that the perceiving distances via auditory information alone would be difficult as compared to visual distance perception. However, our contribution was primarily in showing that users can use perception learning to different reverberation time of auditory signals toward perceiving the distance of the targets by learning to associate different reverberation time with different perceived distance to targets. And secondly, we show this type of perceptual learning to the perceived location of targets using auditory reverberation in a calibration phase in VR does carry over towards better distance perception, not only in an immediately post-test phase, but also persists over a period of 6 months after experiencing perceptual learning. Back to this question, yes, we are interested in study if perceptual learning via calibration be by auditory reverberation to different distances will also show similar effect in an action-based distance estimation measured of blind walking as well. Since our current study uses a relative distance estimation measure, it's an open question of showing calibration in an action-based distance estimation measure as well. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for your questions here.
Okay, great. Moving on to the next paper. Sanjin, there are actually a bunch of questions here, so let me go through the first one if that's okay, and then maybe you can talk with the audience in the Discord channel.
Okay, sure.
Great. So first question from Alireza, it's concerning the user ability to smell odors that were no longer present. Could this be caused by odor lingering in the environment? And also from the same attendee, with the system design that you presented, it looks like odors are diffused around the user's nose. Was this reported by any of the subjects in the studies?
Okay, so thank you for the question. And I think I can answer a question from Rob at the same time because they are similar. And
yeah, sure.
Yeah, we definitely consider the the residue of odorants from the device, and to solve this problem, we particularly selected a different odor display device that is quite different from the normal odor display from using airflow from the tube or other vaporizing devices. And this is you can purchase it from a company called Aroma Drawing, and this is a device that ejects a very quick micro airflow ejections of odorants, and it's very directional to your nose, so you only need a very small dose of odorants to produce your odor senses. And then when it stops the display, it can quickly dissolve to the air, so that there is little residue in the experiment. And those, I think, although not completely disappeared, but only at least 95% of the odor residue is not detectable. So that solved our problem of residues in the environment. So I think their senses of non-presented odors are majorly from cross-modal effect, and also very few, almost no participants reported about the residue. And we also make sure that between each session there is enough time to for them to rest, and to make sure there is no residue in the environment, and also recover from olfactory adaptation. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you have some other questions, but as I said before, let's move on to the next paper, and maybe we can come back later if we have time. So Brandon, I'm not sure for which paper this question is, but anyway, have you considered or tried using head rotations or distractions, such as those that might enable higher redirection and redirected walking as haptic resets?
Yes, I assume that's for the adaptive resets paper. I mean, we've considered it. I think the main reason we went with more kind of action-based resets is to, I guess, reduce the requirement to look away or be distracted. You could put instructions off to the side and the person could look across at the instructions and look back and their hands reset. And there was some recent work that can suppress the redirection through blinking as well. So you could potentially use a blink as a reset or change blindness. We didn't obviously do it in this paper, but it's something that obviously can be explored and and could be combined, I guess, with your adaptive reset. So if you're not distracted, you can do an adaptive reset. If you are distracted, the system can reset for you and kind of mask it.
Okay, great. Since Heiyon is not here and we have more questions for Sanjin, maybe let's go back to those, because I think we still have a couple of minutes left until the session ends. So let me see. Okay, so moving on to a question by Serafina. My understanding is that auditory cocktail party effect works because people usually have something in mind that they are particularly attuned to, like a name or subject of interest. So if people may only need to notice one olfactory object of attention at a time, what is the benefit of still keeping the presence of mixed odors and alternating the intensity over just only presenting one olfactory stimulus at a time, which is like a more simple solution?
Okay, so first, although it's not described thoroughly in the presentation, but there are also some other studies that use odors presentation, like to display users' spatiality, like their locations and the distance and also directions. So I think by building an interaction between multiple odors, like it has more possibilities in future applications for like direction and the distance presentation. And therefore we thought like it was necessary to study the presentation of mixed odors, and also to answer your next question, for what if like use the simple solution of one single odor display, I think the results might be more sensitivity but less realness, I think, but we still need to do some further study on this.
Okay, great.
That's
so
okay.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to thank all the presenters and the organization, and of course all the audience we had today. So I think this is all we had for today's session. Thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, thank you. It's okay, just thank you, Sandra, and
yeah, you're welcome.
Very nice meeting you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your effort.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.